For 40 years it sat in a locked case behind the counter. A diamond ring set in platinum with filigree work so delicate that the old jeweler remembered the day he appraised it like it was yesterday. He remembered the woman who brought it in, nervous about the cost, in love with the stone. He did not expect to see it again in his lifetime. He certainly did not expect to see it on a Tuesday afternoon, held by a woman claiming to be the stepdaughter, asking how much she could get for it in cash. He did not expect to call the police instead of an offer. That jeweler knew something the stepdaughter didn't. He had known it for 4 decades. He knew whose hand that ring had been on, whose last request kept it locked away, and exactly how much it meant to the man who still wore his wife's memory like a second skin. The stepdaughter thought she was cashing in a forgotten trinket. She was actually walking into the middle of a story that would expose a decade of resentment, a contested will, and a silver-bearded patriarch who had been waiting for someone to cross that line. The question nobody asked yet is the one that matters most. Why would a woman risk everything to sell something that was never hers to begin with? To understand why that ring mattered, you have to understand Charles. He was 63 years old when his wife Eleanor died. They had been married for 12 years, a second marriage for both of them. Charles had been a building contractor in Western Kentucky his whole adult life. He knew how to read a blueprint, how to pour a foundation that would hold for 50 years, how to look at something made of wood and stone and tell you exactly where the weak point was. He had never been good at reading people the same way. Eleanor had been the one who understood people. She had worked as a nurse for 30 years, raised a daughter from her first marriage alone after her husband walked out, and still had enough warmth left over to fill a house. When Eleanor died of pancreatic cancer, Charles did what he always did when something broke. He tried to fix it. He couldn't fix her, so he fixed the house instead. Replaced the back porch, repainted the kitchen, put in new crown molding in the bedroom she had used as a sewing room. He did not touch her jewelry box. It sat on the dresser where she had left it, a wooden box with a brass hinge that she had bought at a craft fair years ago. Inside, among cheaper pieces, was the ring. A diamond set in platinum with filigree so delicate it looked like frozen lace under a magnifying glass. Eleanor had inherited it from her own mother, who had inherited it from her mother before her. It had been appraised in 1984 by a jeweler named Arthur Whitaker, who ran a small shop on Main Street in Harlan. Whitaker had written the appraisal by hand on a yellow card and filed a carbon copy in a metal cabinet behind his counter. He was a meticulous man. He had been in business since 1972 and had never once thrown away an appraisal record. Charles kept the ring in the box. He never wore it. He never sold it. He kept it because Eleanor had asked him to keep it and because some things are not meant to be turned into cash. The stepdaughter did not see it that way. Lauren was Eleanor's daughter from her first marriage. She had been 18 when Eleanor married Charles, old enough to resent the new man in her mother's life and young enough to never grow out of it. She moved out within a year, married young, divorced young, and spent the next 2 decades cycling through jobs and relationships with the same unstable rhythm. She visited her mother rarely. She visited Charles never. When Eleanor got sick, Lauren showed up at the hospital exactly twice. The first time, she stayed for 30 minutes. The second time, she did not come back. At the funeral, she stood in the back row and left before the reception. Eleanor's will had been straightforward. The house, the savings, and her personal effects went to Charles. A small life insurance policy went to Lauren. The ring was specifically mentioned. My diamond ring, inherited from my mother, I leave to my husband Charles, not to her daughter. Lauren had known about that ring her whole life. She had tried it on as a teenager, had asked her mother if she could have it when she got married. Eleanor had said no. It was not a gift for a wedding. It was a piece of family history, meant to stay in the hands of someone who understood what it meant. After Eleanor's death, Lauren called Charles exactly once. She asked about the ring. Charles told her it was safe. She asked if he planned to sell it. He said no. She said, "It's not really yours, you know, it's a family heirloom." Charles said, "It was your mother's wish." Lauren hung up. That was 2 years before the Tuesday afternoon, when the jeweler's phone rang. Arthur Whitaker was 71 years old and had been planning to retire for 5 years but never got around to it. His eyesight was not what it used to be, but his memory was still sharp. When the woman walked into his shop at 2:15, he noticed her before she said a word. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a blazer that did not fit right, carrying a small velvet pouch. She looked nervous, the way people look when they are selling something they do not want to explain. She set the pouch on the glass counter. She said she wanted a cash appraisal. She said the ring had belonged to her mother and she needed to sell it quickly because of medical bills. Whitaker opened the pouch and pulled out the ring. He recognized it immediately. The platinum setting, the 6-prong head, the filigree that ran down both shoulders, hand-carved, impossible to duplicate. He had seen that ring exactly once before in 1984 when a young nurse named Alina had brought it in. She had been engaged to a man she did not end up marrying. She had wanted to know what it was worth. Whitaker had told her it was irreplaceable. He had written the appraisal, typed the number, and filed the card. He looked at the woman on the other side of the counter. He asked her name. She said Lauren. He asked how she had come to possess the ring. She said it had been her mother's. He asked if she had any documentation. She said no. She asked if he could give her an offer today. Whitaker said he needed to do some research, that antique rings required verification, and that he could have an answer by the end of the week. He put the ring back in the velvet pouch and told her he would hold it for safekeeping. She hesitated. He smiled. She agreed. The moment she walked out the door, Whitaker went to his filing cabinet. He pulled the carbon copy from 1984. He recognized the handwriting. He recognized the name on the appraisal. He dialed the only number he had for the original owner. It was the same number he had dialed 40 years earlier because Alina had never changed it. The man who answered said, "Hello," Whitaker said. "This is Arthur Whitaker from Whitaker Fine Jewelry. Are you the husband of Alina?" There was a long silence. Then Charles said, "Yes." Whitaker said, "I have your wife's ring. A woman just brought it in. She says she wants to sell it. She said it was her mother's. I need you to come to my shop." Charles was at the shop within 20 minutes. He had not walked that fast since his heart condition had been diagnosed. He did not care. He stood at the counter while Whitaker explained what had happened. He held the velvet pouch in his hands. He opened it. He looked at the ring. He did not say anything for a long time. Whitaker said, "Do you want to press charges?" Charles looked up. "Where is she now?" "I don't know. She said she'd come back Friday." Charles put the ring back in the pouch. He said, "Let her come back Friday." But the question that hung in the air between them was not about the ring. It was about something deeper. How does a woman who barely spoke to her mother in the final years suddenly show up at the same jeweler who appraised the ring 4 decades ago, carrying the one heirloom her mother explicitly left to someone else? How did she even know where to find it? Charles had kept the ring in a locked safe in his bedroom closet. A safe with a combination he had never written down. A safe he had opened exactly twice since Alina's death. He had not told Lauren where the ring was. He had not told anyone where the ring was. Somebody had given her that information. Somebody had given her access. And as Charles sat in his truck outside Whitaker's shop, he began to realize that this was not a simple theft. It was a message, and whoever sent it was not finished yet. Charles did not go home that night. He went to the sheriff's office first. He sat in a plastic chair across from a deputy named Callahan who wrote down everything on a yellow legal pad. Theft by unlawful taking, a Class D felony in Kentucky if the item was valued over $500 and had been taken from a residence. Whitaker gave a written statement confirming the ring's appraised value in 1984 was $2,200, but adjusted for inflation and the current vintage jewelry market, Arthur estimated it closer to $14,000. That put the charge at Class C prison time, 1 to 5 years. The deputy said they needed proof that Charles owned the ring, the will, the appraisal, the original receipt of inheritance. Charles had all of it in a fireproof box at home. He drove back, collected the documents, and returned to the station by 8 that evening. By 9, a warrant was drafted. By midnight, a patrol car was parked outside Lauren's apartment in Middlesbrough. But she was not there. The apartment manager said she had left that afternoon with a suitcase. She had paid rent in cash through the end of the month. She had not told anyone where she was going. Charles spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled collapse. He kept the ring in his pocket in its velvet pouch and touched it every few minutes like a talisman. He called Eleanor's old phone number just to hear her voicemail recording. He did not tell anyone about the theft. Not his neighbor Earl, not his attorney, not his stepdaughter's half-brother who lived in Louisville. He told no one because he did not know who to trust. And then on the 4th day, the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from a town 3 counties away. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. The message was typed in bold, 12-point font, no signature. It read, "You got the ring back. That was a warning. Next time it will be the whole safe. Stay out of her affairs and she stays out of yours." Charles read it twice, then he called the sheriff. The handwriting analysis came back inconclusive. The paper was generic. The envelope had been licked, not taped, and the DNA sample was too degraded to run. But the deputy noted something important. The letter did not mention the ring by name. It said the ring back. The only people who knew the ring had been returned were Charles Arthur Whittaker and whoever had taken it. The deputy asked Charles for a list of everyone who knew about the ring's location. Charles wrote down 3 names: himself, Arthur, and his neighbor Sally. Sally was 78 years old and lived 2 houses down. She had been Eleanor's closest friend for 30 years. She had a key to Charles's house for emergencies. She fed the cat when he traveled. She knew the safe was in the bedroom closet because she had helped Eleanor pick out the safe 14 years ago. But Charles could not believe Sally would betray him. He called her that evening and asked if she had told anyone about the ring. Sally said no, but then she hesitated. She said, "I did mention it to Diana a few months ago at church." Diana was Eleanor's sister. She lived in Lexington, 4 hours away. She had never liked Charles. She had thought Eleanor married beneath herself, had said as much at the wedding. After Eleanor died, Diana had asked for the ring. She said it rightfully belonged to blood family, not a second husband. Charles had refused. Diana had stopped speaking to him entirely. The deputy drove to Lexington the next morning. He interviewed Diana in her home. She denied any involvement. She said she had not spoken to Lauren in over a year. She said she had no idea where Lauren was. She seemed genuinely surprised that the ring had been stolen. The deputy believed her. But one detail did not add up. Diana said she had not spoken to Lauren in over a year, but Sally remembered Diana asking about the ring only 3 months ago. Diana had specifically asked Sally if Charles still kept it in the bedroom safe. Charles had not told anyone about the safe combination. He had changed it after Eleanor died. The only person who knew the new combination was Charles himself. Or so he thought. Later that week, Charles went through Eleanor's sewing room. He was looking for anything she might have written down, any note that could explain how Lauren had gained access. He found a small leather journal in the bottom drawer of her desk. Eleanor had kept a diary on and off for most of her adult life. This one spanned the last 6 months before her diagnosis. Charles had never read it. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The first entry was dated April 3rd, 3 years ago. Eleanor wrote about a conversation she had with Diana on the phone. Diana had asked about the will. Eleanor said she had not updated it since her marriage to Charles. Diana suggested she leave something to Lauren, specifically the ring. Eleanor wrote, "I told Diana the ring belongs to Charles. She did not accept that answer. She said Lauren has a right to family property. I said the right was mine to decide." She hung up. "I am tired of this." The next entry, a week later, was darker. Eleanor wrote that Diana had been calling every few days. She had told Eleanor that Charles was not to be trusted, that he was only after her money, that he had a gambling problem he was hiding. Eleanor wrote, "I know this is not true, But the poison is hard to ignore when you hear it every day. I am starting to doubt myself. There were 3 more entries that mentioned Diana. In the final one, dated 2 days before Alina's diagnosis, she wrote, "Diana wants me to change the will. She said if I do not leave the ring to Lauren, I will regret it. I told her I am not changing anything. She said, 'We will see.' I do not know what she means by that. I am afraid." Charles closed the journal. He sat in the sewing room until the sun went down. He thought about Diana's face when the deputy interviewed her, the mask of innocence, the rehearsed surprise. He thought about Lauren showing up at Whitaker's shop, carrying a ring she could not have accessed without inside help. And he thought about the letter. That was a warning. Next time, it will be the whole safe. He called the deputy the next morning. He told him about the journal. The deputy requested a warrant for Diana's phone records. It took a week. When the records arrived, they showed something disturbing. 3 weeks before the ring theft, Diana had made a series of calls to an untraceable prepaid phone. The phone was registered to a false name. It had been active only for that week. It had been used to call Lauren's number 4 times. On the day of the theft, the prepaid phone had pinged a tower within half a mile of Charles's house. The deputy checked the security camera footage from the gas station on the corner of Charles's street. A woman matching Lauren's description was visible on camera walking toward the house at 11 in the morning. She had entered through the back door. She had left 11 minutes later. She was carrying a small velvet pouch. The deputy arrested Diana the following week. She was charged with conspiracy to commit theft. She denied everything, but the phone records and the camera footage painted a clear picture. She had orchestrated the theft. She had given Lauren the safe combination. She had pressured Alina to change the will in the months before her death. And when that failed, she had waited. She had bided her time. And then she recruited her niece to do the one thing Alina had explicitly forbidden: take the ring out of Charles's hands. But Diana did not act alone. The phone records revealed one more number, a number that belonged to someone Charles had known for 30 years, someone he had trusted completely, someone who had access to his house, his keys, his safe, and his secrets. That number belonged to Sally, the neighbor who fed the cat, the friend of 30 years, the woman who had helped pick out the safe. Sally had been talking to Diana for months. They had been meeting for coffee in town, always at the diner on the east side, never near Charles's house. Alina had known Sally and Diana were close. She had mentioned it in the journal. Sally thinks Diana has my best interest at heart. I am not sure. When the deputy questioned Sally, she broke down in minutes. She said Diana had convinced her that Charles was hoarding the ring, that it rightfully belonged to Lauren, that Alina had wanted Lauren to have it but had been too weak to stand up to Charles. Sally believed she was doing the right thing. She admitted giving Diana the new safe combination. She admitted letting Lauren into the house on the day of the theft. She said she was sorry. Charles could not forgive her. He did not press charges against Sally, but he never spoke to her again. He changed the locks. He removed her key from the key ring. He sold the safe and bought a new one with a biometric lock that only his thumbprint could open. Lauren was arrested 2 weeks later in a motel room in Tennessee. She had sold the ring to a pawnbroker in Knoxville for $3,000 cash. The pawnbroker had already resold it to a private collector. The collector refused to return the ring. Charles had to hire an attorney to file a stolen property claim. It took 6 months and $4,000 in legal fees to get the ring back. When it finally arrived in the mail, insured and certified, Charles sat at his kitchen table and looked at it. The diamond caught the light. The filigree cast a tiny shadow on the wood. He had almost lost it. He had almost lost the only physical piece of Alina that remained. And he had discovered that the person who orchestrated its theft was not a stranger, not a criminal, but the woman his wife had trusted most. The ring went back into the safe. Charles kept the journal, the appraisal, and the police report in a separate folder. He did not tell anyone about the letter. He kept it tucked inside the journal between the pages where Alina had written, "I am afraid." But the story was not over. because 6 months later Charles received another letter. This one had a different postmark, a different typeface, and a message that made him pick up the phone and call the sheriff for the second time. That message was, "You won this round, but I have something you want more than a ring. Call me." There was a phone number. Charles dialed it, and the voice on the other end said, "Hello, Father. It has been a long time." The voice on the other end of the line called Charles father. He had not been called that in 32 years. He had a son named Daniel, born when Charles was 24, to a woman named Andrea whom he had dated briefly before meeting Alina. Andrea had told him she miscarried. She had moved out of state. Charles had believed her. He had no reason not to. Now Daniel was 32 years old. He had been raised by his mother and a stepfather in northern Ohio. He had learned the truth about his biological father only after Andrea died of a heart attack the previous year. Among her belongings, he found a birth certificate with Charles's name listed. He found letters Charles had written to Andrea, letters she had never sent. He found a photograph of Charles standing in front of a half-built house, young and grinning, with a hammer in his hand. Daniel had spent 6 months deciding whether to make contact. He had hired a private investigator. He had learned about Charles's life, about Alina's death, about the ring, about the theft, about Diana's arrest. He had seen the news coverage, and then he had written the letter. Charles listened to Daniel talk for 40 minutes that first night. He heard about a childhood in Toledo, about a stepfather who was kind but distant, about a mother who never spoke of the man who had fathered her child. He heard about Daniel's own marriage, his 2 young daughters, his job as a high school history teacher. He heard a voice that sounded nothing like his own but carried the same cadence, the same pauses between sentences, the same habit of clearing his throat before saying something important. They agreed to meet. Charles drove to Lexington the following Saturday. They sat in a diner near the university, the same diner where Diana and Sally had met to plot the theft months earlier. Charles did not tell Daniel that. Some coincidences were too heavy to share on a first meeting. Daniel was taller than Charles, with his mother's coloring and his father's jaw. He shook Charles's hand formally, then sat down and ordered coffee. They talked for 3 hours, about Andrea, about the lie, about the years that could not be recovered. Daniel said he did not want money. He did not want anything except to know where he came from. Charles told him about Alina, about the ring, about the theft, about Diana and Sally and Lauren. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Charles finished, Daniel said, "You have been through a lot." Charles said, "So have you." They exchanged phone numbers. They agreed to stay in touch. Charles drove home that evening feeling lighter than he had in years. He had a son. He had grandchildren he had never met. He had a second chance at something he thought he had lost forever. But the lightness did not last. 3 weeks later, Diana was released on bail pending trial. She had hired a high-profile attorney from Louisville. The attorney filed a motion to dismiss the conspiracy charge, arguing that Lauren had acted alone and that Diana had no direct involvement in the theft. The motion was denied, but the hearing bought Diana something more valuable than a dismissal. It bought her time. During those weeks of freedom, Diana began a campaign. She called every relative she could reach. She told them Charles had fabricated the story, that he had planted evidence, that he was a bitter old man obsessed with a ring that should never have been his. She told them he had hidden a secret child for decades, proof that he had been unfaithful to Alina. She told them the son was probably a fraud, a con artist Charles had invented to gain sympathy. The family split. Some believed Diana, some believed Charles, most stayed silent. The rift that had been papered over for years cracked open. Charles lost contact with Alina's side of the family entirely. His own relatives, distant and scattered, offered polite condolences and nothing more. Daniel felt the backlash. His wife received anonymous messages calling her husband a liar. His daughters were asked questions at school by children whose parents had heard the rumors. Daniel called Charles and said, "I don't know if I can do this." Charles said, "I understand." He did understand. He had spent a lifetime understanding that some truths cost more than they are worth. Then the second shoe dropped. Lauren, facing a felony conviction and prison time, made a deal. She gave the prosecution a full statement in exchange for a reduced sentence. In that statement, she named Diana as the mastermind of the theft. She also named a third person she had never mentioned before, a man named Craig, Diana's son, Charles's stepnephew. Craig had been the one who broke into Charles's house 2 years earlier to copy the safe combination. Craig had been the one who convinced Lauren to take the ring. Craig had been the one who drove her to Knoxville to sell it. Craig was arrested at his home in London, Kentucky. He confessed immediately. He said Diana had promised him a share of the money from the ring sale. He said she had also promised him a role in something bigger, something involving Charles's estate, something that would require more than a stolen ring. The sheriff's office reopened the investigation. They searched Diana's home again. This time they found something they had missed, a safe deposit box key. The box was at a bank in Corbin. Inside was a folder of documents. The documents included a forged will dated 2 months after Alina's death. The forged will left everything Charles owned to Diana. The signature was a crude copy of Charles's handwriting, barely convincing. But it was enough to suggest a pattern of attempted fraud that extended far beyond a single ring. Diana was charged with attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit forgery. Her bail was revoked. She was held without bond pending trial. The family rift became a chasm. Charles was called a liar, a victim, a fool, depending on who was speaking. He stopped answering his phone. Daniel came to visit him that weekend. They sat on Charles's porch looking at the same ridge where the sun set every evening. Daniel said, "I read the letters my mother kept. Yours, the one she never sent." Charles said nothing. Daniel said, "You told her you loved her. You asked her to marry you. She said no. She never told you why. I think I know why now. She was afraid of what her family would say. She was afraid of you finding out about me. She was afraid of everything." Charles looked at his son. "I would have married her," he said. "I would have raised you." "I know," Daniel said. "That's the hardest part." The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Diana's attorney filed motions to suppress the evidence from the safe deposit box, arguing that the search warrant was too broad. The judge denied the motion. The trial date held. Charles spent the winter alone. He did not put up Christmas decorations. He did not attend the annual church potluck. He stayed in the house with the ring in the safe and Alina's journal on the nightstand. He read it every few days, looking for clues he might have missed, answers to questions he had never thought to ask. He found one. In an entry dated 6 weeks before Alina's death, she wrote about a conversation with Diana in which Diana mentioned Charles's other family. Alina wrote, "Diana said Charles has a son. She said she has proof. I told her I did not want to hear it. She said I had a right to know. I said I already knew everything I needed to know. I married Charles because I loved him. Nothing she says can change that." Diana had known about Daniel for years. She had used that knowledge as leverage, as a weapon. She had threatened to tell Alina about the son, to destroy the marriage, to poison the trust. And Alina had chosen not to believe her. She had chosen Charles. Charles closed the journal. He called Daniel and told him what he had found. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She was a good woman." Charles said, "She was the best." The trial began on a rainy Monday in March. The courtroom was full. Diana sat at the defense table in a navy suit, her face composed, her eyes cold. Lauren sat in the back row, wearing an ankle monitor. Craig was not present. He had already pleaded guilty and was serving a 2-year sentence. The prosecution presented the phone records, the camera footage, the forged will, the safe deposit box. Diana's attorney argued that Diana was a victim of circumstance, manipulated by her son and her niece, guilty only of trusting the wrong people. The jury deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Diana was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the legal fees Charles had incurred recovering the ring. She did not look at him as the judge read the sentence. She did not look at anyone. Lauren received probation and mandatory counseling. She wrote Charles a letter of apology. He read it and filed it in the same folder as the journal and the police report. He did not respond. Craig completed his sentence and moved to Florida. He did not contact the family again. Sally moved to a retirement community in Bowling Green. She sent Charles a Christmas card every year. He threw them away unopened. Charles and Daniel continued to meet every few months. Daniel brought his wife and daughters to Kentucky for a weekend that summer. Charles taught his granddaughters how to build a birdhouse in the workshop. He watched them hammer nails into scrap wood, laughing, arguing, competing. He thought about Alina. He thought about the ring. He thought about the long chain of decisions and lies and betrayals that had led to this moment. And then he thought about something else. He thought about the name on the forged will. Diana had tried to take everything. She had failed. But she had also revealed something Charles had never fully understood: the depth of the hatred that had been hiding beneath the surface of a family that pretended to be whole. The ring was back in the safe. The safe was locked. The house was quiet. The ridge was dark against the sky. Charles sat on the porch and waited for the morning. But there was one more thing. One detail that had been buried in the evidence from the safe deposit box, a detail the prosecution had not used, a detail Diana's attorney had successfully suppressed. It was a letter, handwritten, dated 3 years before Alina's death. It was addressed to Diana, and it was signed by someone Charles had trusted his entire adult life. That letter would change everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his wife, and the woman who had tried to destroy him. And it would force him to make a choice he never imagined he would have to face. Charles held the letter in his hands for a long time before he opened it. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Alina's, the same looping cursive she had used in her journal, in the notes she left on the kitchen counter, in the letters she wrote to him when he was on job sites. But this letter was addressed to Diana, and it was dated 3 years before Alina's death. He sat in the same chair he had sat in when he read her journal. The same evening light came through the window. The same quiet filled the room. He unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Diana, I am writing this because I need you to understand something I cannot say to your face. I know about Charles's son. I have known for years. Andrea told me herself before she moved away. She thought I deserved the truth. She was right. I was angry at first. I felt betrayed. But over time I realized that the man I married was not the man who made that mistake. He was the man who stayed. He was the man who loved me. I have chosen to forgive what happened before I knew him. And I am asking you to let this go. Do not use it against him. Do not bring it up. If you love me as a sister, you will put this knowledge away and never speak of it again. I will not mention this letter to Charles, but I will remember who helped me carry this burden and who tried to make it heavier." Charles read the letter 3 times. His hands trembled. Alina had known. She had known about Daniel for years, and she had chosen him anyway. She had asked Diana to keep it secret to protect him, and Diana had promised nothing. Diana had kept the letter. She had hidden it. She had used the knowledge not to help Alina but to threaten her, to manipulate her, and eventually to try to take everything Charles had. The letter explained so much. It explained why Diana had been so confident in her attempts to destroy Charles's marriage. It explained why Alina had written in her journal that she was afraid. She had been afraid not of Diana's lies, but of Diana's truth. She had been afraid that Charles would learn she had known about his son, and that he would think she had hidden it from him as a weapon. She had wanted to protect him from the knowledge that she knew, because she had forgiven him without his apology, without his confession. Charles folded the letter carefully. He placed it inside the journal, next to the entry where Alina had written, "I am afraid." He understood now. He understood the full weight of what Alina had carried. She had not told him because she did not want him to feel shame. She had protected him from a truth that would have broken him years earlier, and she had done it alone. He called Daniel that night. He told him about the letter. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Charles finished, Daniel said, "She was remarkable." Charles said, "She was." Daniel said, "I wish I could have met her." Charles said, "She would have loved you." The next morning, Charles drove to the prison where Diana was serving her sentence. He requested a visit. He sat across from her at a plastic table behind a glass partition. She looked older, thinner, harder. She did not speak first. Charles placed the letter in the document tray and pushed it toward the glass. He said, "I know what you did. I know how you used her. I know you kept this letter like a loaded gun, waiting for the right moment to fire. But she outlasted you. She died loving me. She died trusting me. And you will spend the next 4 years in a cell, and then you will walk out into a world where no one believes a word you say." Diana stared at the letter. She did not pick it up. She did not deny it. She said, "She was a fool." Charles said, "No, she was braver than you will ever be." He stood up, placed his hand on the glass, and walked away. He did not look back. He drove home through the hills of eastern Kentucky. The leaves were turning. The air was clean. He thought about the ring, safe in its vault. He thought about Alina's face the morning she told him she loved him for the first time. He thought about Daniel's daughters hammering nails into birdhouses in the workshop. He thought about the letter, about the choice Alina had made, about the forgiveness she had given him without being asked. He pulled into his driveway as the sun began to set. The house was quiet. The ridge was gold and purple. He went inside, opened the safe, and took out the ring. He held it in his palm and let the diamond catch the last light through the window. The filigree gleamed. The platinum felt warm. He carried the ring to the workshop. He placed it on the workbench, next to the half-finished rocking chair he had been building for Daniel's oldest daughter. He did not lock it away again. He left it there in the open, where the light could reach it. Because he understood now that some things are not meant to be hidden. Some things are meant to be seen, to be passed on, to be held by hands that know their weight. Alina had known that. She had trusted him with the ring because she trusted him with her heart, and he had kept it safe, not in a vault, but in the only place that mattered. He picked up a plane and ran it along the edge of the rocking chair. Curls of pale wood fell to the floor. The ring sat on the bench, small and bright, catching every bit of light in the room. He was 73 years old. He had a son he had never known, grandchildren he was learning to love, a house full of memories, and a ring that had cost him more than money to keep. He was still building. He would always be building. The door to the workshop opened. Daniel stood in the frame, holding a bag of groceries. "Earl said you forgot to eat again," Daniel said. Charles grinned for the first time in months. "Earl talks too much," Charles said. "He also said to tell you the rocking chair better be finished by Thanksgiving or he's coming over to finish it himself." Charles shook his head. He looked at the ring. He looked at his son. He picked up the plane and went back to work. Some things are not meant to be hidden. Some things are meant to be seen, to be passed on, to be held by hands that know their weight. And some things just need people sitting together at a table, warm and fed, telling each other about the ordinary days. Charles keeps the ring on the workbench now in the open where the light can reach it. He does not lock it away anymore. He does not check the safe before bed. The thing he spent months fighting to keep turned out to be less valuable as a possession than as a reminder, not of what he almost lost, but of what he had all along. The trust Alina placed in him. The forgiveness she gave without his asking. The family he built with his own hands, day by ordinary day, long before anyone tried to tear it down. The letter is still in the journal. He does not show it to anyone. He does not need to. Some truths belong only to the people who lived them. Diana is still in prison. Lauren finished her probation and moved to another state. Craig serves out his sentence in Florida, distant and silent. The family that split over the trial has not reunited. Some fractures do not heal with time. They just become part of the landscape. But Charles has something now that he did not have before. He has Daniel. He has 2 granddaughters who call him Grandpa and argue about who gets to help him in the workshop. He has a rocking chair that will be finished by Thanksgiving because Earl said so, and Earl does not make empty threats. He has evenings on the porch with the ridge dark against the sky and the knowledge that he was chosen. Not by law, not by blood, by love. That is the part that lingers after the ring goes back in its pouch and the trial becomes a memory. The system worked eventually. The truth came out eventually. But what held was not the legal victory. What held was the decision Alina made years ago, sitting alone in a room, writing a letter she never sent. She chose to trust the man she married. She chose to protect him from a truth she knew would wound him. She chose grace over grievance. And Charles, without knowing it, had been living inside that choice ever since. There is a question at the bottom of this story, and it is not about theft or conspiracy or the value of vintage diamonds. It is about what we are willing to protect when no one is watching, what we are willing to forgive when no one would blame us for walking away, who we become in the quiet, unrecorded hours when the only witness is ourselves. Charles did not plan to spend his 70s raising a son he never knew, building birdhouses with granddaughters and leaving a diamond ring on a workbench under a bare bulb. But he will tell you if you ask him that it is exactly where it belongs. Not hidden, not hoarded, not guarded, out in the open where the light can reach it, where the next person who needs it can find it. Earl will be over for dinner tonight. Daniel and the girls are coming Saturday. The rocking chair needs one more coat of varnish. The ridge is starting to green. And somewhere in a pawn shop in Tennessee, a collector still owns a ring he bought in good faith, not knowing the story it carried. Charles does not mind. He has what matters. If this story moved you, if you have ever fought to hold onto something that could not be priced or replaced, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to see more stories about the buildings we make out of the lives we did not plan. Leave a comment. What would you have done with that letter if it had been yours? Charles reads everyone. He will be on the porch. The light will still be on.